morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, we'd like to welcome you to today's Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Configurable Parameters Implementation Working Group meeting. My name is Christina Guimara, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'm joined by other panelists, including Guillermo Bautista Alderete, Isabella Mahane, Scott Lehman, Oswin Thomas, Jenny Iraj, and Haifeng Liu. Just a few reminders before we get started today. Today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting today is intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives, so please keep your comments professional and respectful. You can access closed captioning on the bottom left hand of your screen and the Inteller Transparency Viewer on the bottom right hand of your screen. Be sure to refresh before viewing the Transparency Viewer, and we welcome and look forward to your engagement and participation in today's meeting. For raising your hand during the meeting, the raise hand icon is directly at the bottom of your WebEx screen. If you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making a comment. And please do make sure to pause a few seconds before speaking after you unmute to avoid WebEx cutting off your introduction as that happens. You may also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists. And if you need technical assistance during the meeting today, please send a chat to the event producer and Inteller Events. Today, Isabella will be taking us through working group schedule and meeting objectives before reviewing a summary of comments from the January working group. And then Oswin Thomas will review an executive summary and updates to the benchmark setup. Then Scott Lehman will give an overview on sensitivity analysis of parallel operations benchmark cases. Following this, Guillermo Bautista Alderete will discuss a plan for Go Live. And then Isabella will review some next steps before we wrap up today's meeting. So with that, I'll turn things over to Isabella Mahane, Account Manager at the ISO, to get us started.
Thanks, Christina, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's working group session. So this slide just kind of reiterates what was shared by Christina on the agenda slide. So I think we can jump to the next slide. And here's a snapshot of the CAISO's policy initiative stakeholder process as a whole. And so as you can see here, we are in the implement stage of the process here during the implementation working groups. Next slide. All right. Many of you have seen this slide before, but we like to put it up here as a reminder of the goals of the implementation working group and what it is versus what it is not, right? So an implementation working group is essentially an optional step in the project implementation process to gain feedback from participants and stakeholders on specific issues. So that feedback could include feedback on business process options for interaction with the ISO. It could include technical information before final decisions are made, parameters used in calculations, which is what we'll be discussing today, and then other options that match approved policy implementation. On the other hand, an implementation working group is not, an opportunity to debate approved policies or tariff language. We have our policy initiative stakeholder meetings intended to discuss those items. We also have release user groups, technical user groups, and settlement user groups to discuss specific items related to those areas. And then also the implementation working group is not a forum to discuss issues related to market simulation or parallel operations setup or the data quality in those areas. We do have our weekly recurring parallel operations meetings scheduled on Mondays and Thursdays, and those are the right avenues to discuss any issues or questions related to market simulation or parallel operations. So can we go to the next slide? All right, so here we are with the implementation working group schedule. You'll see down at the bottom graphic that we are in the first working group in the fine-tuning phase of parallel operations in this effort. So here at the February working group, we also have added an additional working group to April. So that is tentatively scheduled for towards the end of April. All right. And we just remind everyone that although this working group is occurring concurrent to market sim and parallel operations, it is its own independent effort. Okay, next slide. And then some engagement objectives for this working group. We'd really like to review and assess results of analysis scenarios, and it's also an opportunity for the community to provide feedback and observations on scenario results from analysis of each of the 5 configurable parameters, and then also make recommendations on parameter changes and refinements based on data-driven results from the analysis. Next slide. All right. Any questions or comments before we jump into our next section? I do see a hand from Michelle Keto.
Energy Division. So I noted that you said that this is not a forum to discuss what's going on parallel ops, but for purposes of developing the scenarios, you guys did use parallel operations, and there are issues with parallel operations. So I kind of feel like it actually does need to come in a little bit. So for example, you only have 90 or 100 scheduling coordinators participating in Market Sim. And as a result, at least in parallel ops, they were saying that a lot of the energy was being covered by virtuals. In addition, what we're looking at is February. February is a very low load month, and there could very well be different implications. This is an easy month, right, to get through. So when we look at these parameters, we have to bear in mind that what we're looking at is sort of an easy low load month, and that the effects can be different. So I do think that even though we don't want to discuss parallel operations in full, it does implicate what we're discussing here since we're testing from parallel operations. And I think we have to bear that in mind. And I'll bring up the issues that I have as well as we go through the process. But I just wanted to make that up front. So thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Guillermo and team, did you want to add anything to that before we move on?
Yes, I hear the point Michelle is raising. Yes, I think there is some relationship between what we are analyzing here and the health of parallel operations. I think it's a matter of how reasonably we can go into addressing every single issue that is related to parallel operations. We are cognizant of the results predicated on the quality of the parallel operations. We have taken effort to ensure that we are aware of all the issues that may be impacting parallel operations to ensure that we have a clean benchmark as much as we can. But this is not a forum to discuss specifically the setup of parallel operations or the quality issues that may be impacting specific data points. That is the forum for which we have a dedicated effort on the other call for parallel operations.
I see, Michelle, you raised your hand again. Can we go ahead and unmute Michelle?
Yeah, but I think it's really important for us to be careful in the conclusions we draw from what we're doing in configurable parameters, given the issues that we're seeing in parallel operations. So for example, we're looking at February and we're saying, oh, this, like you're saying, for example, that the configurable parameters have less effect in parallel operations than in Market Sim, but that might have something to do with the way parallel operations is working. Not, I mean, you guys say it's better data, but I might argue that it's worse data because you only have 90 of 360 entities participating and you're not seeding the data. So I just think we have to be careful. That's all I'm saying. So thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, any other comments, questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. We can jump one more. We'll go into a summary of some of the feedback we received from the last session. So a couple themes stood out from comments on the January 29th session. Specifically, we saw that market participants were supportive of the parallel operations plan to assess the 3 parameters and adjust based on the analysis, and also lower values for the envelope multiplier and deployment and balance reserve factor. lastly, we also did get some support on the proposal that we made in the Market Surveillance Committee meeting on February 6th to utilize lower values for a more conservative EDM launch. I will note that these are just some of the themes that that were in the comments, and we have posted a matrix out on the EDM initiative webpage responding to all of the comments that we received. So if you're looking for some more details, that is available out on the EDM initiative webpage. Okay. Right, next slide. Yeah, any comments, questions on comments from the 29th?
I'm not seeing any questions coming in at this time.
Okay, next slide. All right, I think that brings us to our next section, so I'll turn things over to Oswin.
Thanks, Isabella. Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'll go through the executive summary for the whole presentation. So part of the, one of the main items that we wanted to check during parallel operations is whether our benchmark cases and all the applications with all the new additions, the GHG, the NPM for RUC, whether we are able to maintain the standard publishing window by 1 p.m. So we will show results later, but based on what we are currently seeing, the standard time windows are being respected and we're able to publish within the standard window. And then from what we've seen so far from the parallel operation benchmark cases for a sequence of trade dates is that the envelope constraint multiplier and the DIF factors have lesser impacts compared to what we did observe in market sim, as this could be due to a low load day, low load period in February. But based on what we are seeing, these are the conclusions that we are drawing right now. And we will keep analyzing this over the next few months. And based on the assessment of market simulation and what we've seen in the first part of parallel operations and the feedback from participants, we are proposing to adjust down the values of the envelope constraint multipliers and the DIF factor values for the second phase of parallel operations. So we will show plots and reasonable conclusions that why we are basing these claims. And the ISO finally from Guillermo, we are proposing a two-phase approach to implement the tuning of the configurable parameters for go live. So we will also present detailed slides on what the two-phase approach is. So overall, this is the executive summary for today's slides. Can move to the next slide. Okay. So here is the plan for parallel operations. Parallel operations is currently running in 3 phases. Phase 1 is focusing only on DA with no economic transfer. So this was the time started on February 2nd for trade date February 3rd, and it went until February 17th. So about 2 weeks where each EDAM BAs were on their own with no economic transfer. The second phase of parallel operations started on 17th for trade date February 18th, where we opened up the economic transfers between the EDAM entities. There's one more phase that's currently yet to be decided when it's starting. That is when we want to analyze the effect of the DA results feeding into the real time and seeing the whole picture. Okay. And details of these plans are in the link here. And this plan also enables us to have one more working session in April. Okay. Going to the next slide. So what we would see in the results in the benchmark case and also the sensitivity analysis is that the first few days of parallel operations are skipped here. And this is mainly because of the following reasons, where the first few days are focused more on ensuring that the data flows between different entities and different applications, and whether participants have access issues and whether there is any issues for the data that is merged from production, and all the software patches are verified. So market results from the first few days usually reflect these transitional dynamics of systems that is being set up for the first time and getting stabilized. And during parallel operation, the ISO generates a day-ahead market save case every single day based on the current available inputs and system processes. And the parallel operations requires the entire functionality of EDAM to DAMI to function in coordination. Okay. We'll move to the next section where we set up the benchmark cases for parallel operations. The following set of parameters are set for the benchmark case in parallel operations. We started with envelope constraint multipliers of 85%, the deployed imbalance reserve factor of 100%, and the set of transmission constraints enforced for imbalance reserves are flow gates and nomograms, similar to what we have for FRP, and not enforcing the contingencies for now. As we said just before, the benchmark cases are between trade dates 207 and 217. We're skipping the first few days of the parallel operations as it reflects the transition dynamics. And this also coincides with the phase 1 of parallel operations where TSR transfers are locked between KAISO and PAC. Okay, and unlike Market Sim, we have not done any changes to the input save case. So no changes were done to the save case that we get from parallel operations. The save cases were taken as is and as inputs to our sensitivity analysis. And then we reran with different values of these parameters that we will cover later in the presentation. So these are some of the main differences between Market Sim and parallel operation. The Market Sim was focused on a single benchmark save case that we had to curate and bring together. And that particular save case was used for all the analysis. Whereas in parallel operations, we are using multiple trade dates from parallel operations as inputs for our analysis without any changes to the save case. So also, because we are not making any changes to these save cases, the results that we see here in the presentation for the benchmarks case are also available in OASIS and CMRI. Going to the next slide. And just based on what we saw from parallel operations so far, trying to draw conclusions from the set of results that we've analyzed so far, compared to Market Sim benchmark case, we saw more thermal resources procuring IRU. So this is due to more realistic bidding data available for all types of resources, much better than parallel Market Sim. And parallel operation cases also span between multiple trade dates, weekday and weekends, whereas the Market Sim benchmark was a single trade date. Parallel operations cases saw lower IRU pricing than Market Sim. Again, from what we've seen so far, we want to associate this with more realistic bidding data available for all types of resources compared to what we saw for Market Sim, where compared to parallel operations, more data was seeded. And like Market Sim, IRD procurement in parallel operations is largely based on renewables. Okay. Move to the next slide. Okay, these are some of the runtimes that we saw in parallel operations for trade dates 2/8 to 2/17. And based on what we've seen so far, these runtimes are currently within the standard time windows to be able to publish by 1 p.m. And these runtimes also include the new applications that are being run for EDAM, the GHG pass and the Iraq NPM. Okay. These times does not include the time taken by the operators to click and review results between each runs. So even after you factor in those times, you can still, we are still within the standard publishing T. Okay. This is a chart for the EDAM BAA cleared energy for all the 3 BAAs. We have the cleared energy for KAISO, PAC West, and PAC East. And from what we can see, EDAM BAAs supply procured from a wide variety of resources. We did observe megawatt short for a few intervals, and those are due to tight supply conditions. Okay. Go to the next slide. These are KAISO DLAP LMPs. For the four regions, SCE, PG&E, STGE, and VEA. So the relap LMPs are 150 for SCE, PG&E, and STGE, and under 80 for VEA. Okay. And these are the ERAM BA, IRU adjusted requirements. These are not the raw requirements. These are adjusted requirements based on the diversity benefit. So we see that the adjusted requirements exhibit an hourly pattern with higher values in the morning and evening peak for all the BAs. And going to the next slide, we will see similar behavior for IRD as well, with adjusted requirements exhibiting an hourly pattern, higher values in the morning and evening peak. And these are some of the prices for IRU and IRD for the different BAs. I'll go through one of these one by one. And also I see hands up, but just give me a few more slides. I'll finish these section and then come back for questions. So we do price analysis for these price spikes for all the BAs for IRU and IRD. Just 1 second, if there is an issue with the slide that I'm on. Currently, I'm on slide 27. Is anyone okay? Just verify whether the slides are fine. Okay, now it's good. Okay, and based on analysis of the prices for some of the trade dates, the prices are set by the demand curve, and you would have opportunity cost setting the prices for other trade dates and congestion also impacting other trade dates. We do have a separate section where we go into each of these in detail and explain how some of these price spikes are based on either demand curve or opportunity costs or from congestion. We'll move to the next slide. Okay, this is for Pac West, and from the results that we will see later in the presentation, Pac West and Pac East did not see much internal congestion in their BAs. So all of these price spikes that we see for these BAs are either based on the demand curve setting the price or from opportunity costs between IRU, IRD, and the energy commodity. Okay. We'll go to the next slide. A similar observation for Pac East, where IRU, IRD pricings are impacted by the opportunity costs and the demand curve. Okay. Move to the next slide. Okay, so for the next several slides, we are now going deeper into the analysis that was presented in the last 3 slides, where we show examples of how the prices are being set by either demand curves or opportunity costs or from congestion. So this is an example for trade day 29 for hour ending 17 for CAISO IRU, where the battery IRU capabilities were exhausted by late afternoon due to the SOC envelope reaching the upper envelope. So as an example, the bid price is 39.39, the IRU marginal price is 48.78, the award is 0.83, bid max is 39.95. You see that the award for the battery resource is much lower than the bid max capability. So it's due to the SOC being constrained for this resource that this resource is not able to discharge. So naturally, it cannot deliver IRU at that 39.39 price. So the price is now being set by the demand curve. Okay. We'll move to the next slide. Okay, and on the other end, economics can also set price when we have infeasibilities. This is an example for CAISO IRD for trade date 210 and hour ending 11, where the lack of downward headroom is leading to infeasibility in hour 14. So 2 examples, we have a ST resource with a derated Pmax and 5 megawatt bid min, fully awarded EN and IRD all the way down to the bid min. Then a VR resource with 30 34.26 IRU bid max, not fully awarded despite infra-marginal IRU bid. The IRD award equals to the EN award, and the IRD price is now set by the economic IRD bid from the VR resource. Okay, move to the next slide. Okay, and similar to what we saw for CAISO, this is an example for PAC, for IRD, where economics and opportunity costs can set the price. So trade day 212 for hour ending 11. So this, there was a period of time till hour ending 11 where a particular unit was dispatched uneconomically for energy. The unit also did provide IRU. And if we dispatch this unit for IRD, there is a loss of opportunity cost from both energy and IRU. So the IRD price that is set for the resource includes the IRD bid price and the lost opportunity cost for both energy and IRU. And we did verify that the IRD price was set by this resource after factoring the lost opportunity cost. And beyond hour ending 11 for this particular resource, the uneconomic dispatch for energy became too much of a loss that cannot be made up by the other bid prices, and the demand curve started setting the price. Okay. Move to the next slide. Another example where economics can now set the price for IRU. So this is trade day 213, hour ending 17 for CAISO IRU. Lack of upward headroom in CAISO led to IRU infeasibility. And then the CAISO IRU price was not set by the demand curve because we saw that the demand curve was on a breakpoint. But here IRU price is rather set by economic IRU bid and lost AS opportunity cost for an MSC resource. The previous example, we saw the lost opportunity cost of energy and IRU coming in. So in this case, IRU bid of 0.37, we have a spinning reserve award at $0.15 against a 38.98 marginal price, resulting in this opportunity cost. So for every IRU megawatt the resource is providing, it's losing the opportunity to provide spin. So we add the spin opportunity cost to form the IRU price for this resource. Okay. I'll come to my last slide, or maybe a few more slides, one more slide. This is again another example for PAC now, where economics can set the price for IRU. So we do not dispatch AS for PAC, so the lost opportunity cost will be from IRU. So here the IRU slack variable landed on a demand curve. That means the IRU price is not set by the demand curve, rather by a combination of economic bid and opportunity cost. In this example, IRU bid is $1 and the energy opportunity cost is 45.8 minus 1665 to 29.15. So similar conclusions from the previous slide, where for every megawatt the unit can provide IRU, it is losing the opportunity to provide energy. So we add the IRU bid and the EN opportunity cost that results in an IRU price of 30.15. Okay. Move to the next slide. Okay. And these are some of the issues that came from parallel operations that was impacting the quality of the solution and also the analysis that we were conducting. So we did see large magnitudes of CAISO MEC and CAISO GAG prices for the first several days of parallel operations. And this was resolved for trade day 219 and was due to a mapping the VEA authority, VEA region to California GAG region when it should not be included. There was another issue where we noticed negative AS prices, and this was resolved on trade day 217, and it was due to the way we set up the requirements for the AS region. And I think the first few days, we also saw extreme IRU congestion going beyond the creating IRU prices that were beyond the price cap. So this was resolved within the first few days of parallel operation, and it was due to a shift factor processing issue. So part of the challenge with these benchmark cases, and also the analysis is that we are heavily dependent on the quality of the solution. So we do feedback to others and try to improve the solution quality as much as possible and as quickly as possible so that we can conduct our analysis. Yeah, I think I can pause now, go to the next slide, and we'll take questions. Yeah.
First in the queue, we have a hand raised from Alva Svoboda. Go ahead, Alva.
Audible? Not looking
Can
good.
please.
We can't hear you too well, Alva. Can you get a little closer to your mic?
Yeah, it'll probably pick up in a second. Tell me if you're hearing me now. Yeah, I see it on the transcript, so I'm assuming you can hear me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This is Alvis Svoboda, PG&E. I have 3 points. One is a general one, Oswin. I would like to give you some feedback that you're presenting very rich material here, very interesting material. I'd appreciate in the future if you would structure it so that you would take questions several times during the course. It is impossible for me to retain my questions as I'm going through, or else to just, I can't pay attention to what you're saying if I'm trying to retain a question in the proper context. So just in the future, if possible, if you could not go through the entire set of your data and then ask for questions at the end, because you presented a lot of substantive points here.
Sure.
And then just two, so basically what I was able to retain were two questions I had. On the runtime of the market, was the BSCH, was that the RSE run? I was trying to figure out where the RSE run was in that stack, the resource sufficiency evaluation.
Can we go to the slide? Yeah, the BSCH is a process that comes after the RSC, Alba.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I obviously the market's closing on time, but I think that should be added in there as well, since that's the first thing that happens after market closing. But it's a good,
Right.
excellent way to present this information so we can see what the kinds of time the different processes take. So thank you for that. The only other thing this is I don't know if this is a quibble or I'm not understanding, but I think your use of the word infeasibility is not quite right when you're talking about the economics. You can have solutions that are apparently uneconomic or out of bid stack, out of merit order, but they're still feasible solutions. And so unless you can actually point to the solution not having arrived at a feasible solution in terms of how the market defines feasibility, I wouldn't use the term infeasibility, because it implies that the market did not converge, and I don't think that's what you're trying to say. So that was just my other quibble, and I'll turn it over to others to ask other questions. Very, very interesting set of data. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Alva. Yeah. I'll just quickly clarify the infeasibilities. You're right. It's not the infeasibilities of the optimization problem itself. It's the infeasibility in the IR procurement. So where
That the target
not all the IRU is procured from demand from resources, and we have to go to the demand curve.
Okay.
And that's what we mean by infeasibility here.
Okay, but that's actually, I mean, that's purely an
a feasible solution.
It's purely an artifact of where the demand curve is set, right? I mean, the demand curve is treated as just another bid effectively in the clearing process. So even there, I would have qualms about your using the word infeasibility. I think if you can be specific about that, you're saying that that's when the demand curve clears the market, I think that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Alva. Yeah, we'll refine it. Yeah.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have a question from Michelle Keto. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so many questions. Could you go back to slide 23, please?
Sure.
So can you tell me whether this is the IFM and do you have virtuals in here, or are you saying this is after the RUC process, what you've gotten? Can you explain that?
Yep, this is after the IFM, Michelle, and we don't have virtuals here because we wanted to show the same comparison between different BAs. Virtuals only exist for CAISO.
But could you include the virtuals? Because basically in parallel operations, I'm understanding that virtuals are clearing a large part of the market. And as a result, we're picking up 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of RCU because we have to cover the virtuals. So I think it's kind of an important point to make. Could you guys provide that?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's going to come in later. So when you guys are going to, this is the base case, but and then you're going to be using parallel operations. I read through the slides before, so you know you guys are going to use different lower values. But are you going to be doing scenarios of higher loads? Because recall, these are like what, 25,000 megawatt days, maybe 20,000 on average. These are not hard days, I'd just like to say again.
Yeah, we'll have to think about that, Michelle, because one thing is that we haven't changed the input so far. So if we want to simulate a higher load, that will be a change to the input. But if that warrants analysis from the entire community, we can definitely look into that next time.
Okay, and then also I just note that if virtuals are clearing that much, I mean, I just looked at production and it looks like virtuals were clearing 17% of the down and 30% of the up. So I'm just trying to figure out if the virtuals you have clearing in parallel ops are unusually large because you don't have very many scheduling coordinators participating. So it's super helpful for us to understand like how realistic parallel ops is. You know, for example, you still have weird GHG numbers, and I don't know how that affects IRU. So those kinds of details would be super helpful for us to understand. Okay, that's
Sure.
not my only one. Okay.
Yeah. And I get an update from Scott that he will be presenting about virtuals in the markets in parallel ops call later today.
Okay, and it would be really great if you guys could update Oasis so we could see it ourselves. I've been asking for that for a couple weeks now. Okay, so I will say a couple of other things, and then I do have a question. It's odd that we see IRU prices higher than energy in some cases. We'll put that in our comments. It also seems odd that we're short IRU on a very not difficult day. I think I know why, but I have a question and a comment about that. It would be helpful if you guys tell us whether we're short because we don't have enough 15-minute dispatchable IRU available, or if because we don't have enough bids, right? So those are two different meanings for us going into the demand curve. Okay, so now my questions. In the market surveillance committee meeting, it kind of seems like you guys were considering reducing the requirement. I'm not seeing that any place in this presentation. So is that off the table now?
Guillermo, do you have any feedback on that one?
Michelle, I think if you have reviewed the deck, you can see that we have a dedicated section to cover that topic. So I will ask you to hold on that until we reach that section.
Okay, but it does have implications. So let me just tell you, I mean, so you're saying you're running out of batteries by 4 o'clock. Well, the obvious reason we're running out of battery charge is because our requirement is so large. So if it's 2,000 megawatts in every hour, you're going to be trying to use up the batteries. So then you don't have batteries for IRU available. So, I mean, I think the requirement also sort of dictates what's going on here. And if you're not going to test that, then you don't really, I mean, my takeaway from the market surveillance committee was that you guys were considering reducing the requirements, but maybe I didn't understand what you guys were saying there. But I just think it's obvious that we run out of batteries by 4 p.m. if our requirement throughout the middle of the day is 2,000, 3,000 megawatts, you know, of IRU. So I'll just note that. Okay, those were my questions and comments. I'll have more as we go along. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
Next, we have a question in the queue from Adara Akoro. Go ahead. Will you please try unmuting Adora one more time, please? Let's give it one more try, please.
Okay, I think it worked that time.
Yes, it works now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good morning. Hi. So I think one of my questions is similar to Michelle's question about the virtuals. I'm just curious, so we're presenting on kind of the comparison between parallel ops and market sim, but it'd be also helpful to have a comparison between parallel ops and production so that we can get a sense of what is the impact in general of, say, IRU on how much energy cleared. And, you know, as Michelle mentioned, maybe it's through the virtuals clearing, what have you, but it'd be helpful if these presentations were also able to provide some insight between how these products and their configurable parameters can be evaluated, or what insight we can gain in relation to current day production cleared amounts.
Yeah, thanks, Adara. We'll take that feedback. The production currently does not have the EDAM and DAMI functionality, so it may not be a direct comparison, but at least with the procurements of the energy and the virtuals, I think we can do a comparison. Yeah.
Just to see, so we can try to get some insight into what impact IR might be on where energy clears and energy prices and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, let me elaborate on that, because I don't want to create false expectations here that comparing side to side with the current production is going to be a apples to apples comparison. The parallel operation case is as close as possible to production, but we are not using the very same information for the same trade date. So if we are running today for trading day February 27th, that will be based in production information that is bidding by 10 o'clock this morning for production. For parallel operations, we are going back to a week ago, because we are running parallel operations in parallel. So we don't have the same information as inputs between production and parallel operations. It's production, but it's with a delay. So
okay,
that
you're not using. Sorry, just one real quick before you move on, point of clarification, because market participants are participating in parallel ops and are, you know, overriding those bids, but you guys are not using that as part of this configurable parameters analysis. You're just using what was seeded.
No, it's a mix. If there is a participant bidding into the market in parallel operations, we take that bid.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that the same bid that is used in parallel operations is the same bid used in production. And
correct.
Indeed, we don't have bids for imbalance reserves. For virtuals, we are going to basically take the information that we have from a week ago, similar day.
Okay, so but now when you're comparing parallel ops results to market sim results, as you have been in these slides, that also is not an apples to apples, right?
Right. And we put all the strings attached to the comparison, just to try to give a sense, right? Because if you compare these two, and people are comparing those, naturally they are going to be asking why the market simulation is so different to parallel operations. We are trying to help bridge that understanding, and everything predicates to the setup of the inputs.
Okay. I still think it'd be helpful if we can, you know, connections to that day's production, since I think you guys did mention that there has been pretty good participation in parallel ops. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Callie Wells. Go ahead, Callie. Can we please try unmuting Callie? Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry, it took a while for them to unmute me. Couple questions. I think it's back on slide 32. Yes, okay, so I want to better understand what's meant by the beyond hour ending 11. So am I understanding this correct, that since the demand curve set the price for IRD in hour ending 11, does it continue to set the price for the rest of the day after hour ending 11? Or I guess, what do you mean by beyond hour ending 11?
Yeah, for this instant of time, it was beyond hour ending 11. This resource became too uneconomical for energy, Callie, that it couldn't set the price anymore.
Just for this resource, but
Just
I
for
guess
this
I'm trying to,
resource.
was the IRD product priced based on the demand curve for every single hour after hour ending 11, or was it just that this resource was no longer awarded?
Yeah, it was mainly this resource no longer awarded for the total IRD price at the entire BA level beyond hour ending 11 to 24. We might have to look. I'm not sure if the demand curve set the price for every single hour. Because usually from the IRD prices that we see over the entire day, it goes down in the later hours.
Yeah,
So
and that's what I'm
yeah,
trying. I would think it would go down, and this isn't
right.
saying that the demand curve set the price for the rest of the day, but if you can clarify that, that would be great.
Yes.
And then the other question I had is similar to, or kind of one on the topics that Michelle was touching on, that basically you guys run out of batteries for IRU. I think it was like by 4 p.m. or something like that. Once you guys run out of batteries for IRU, is it the entire fleet? So are those resources, I guess, once they hit that upper envelope constraint, are those resources at least awarded energy for the rest of the day, or are they just not awarded any product?
It depends on the SOC for energy. Kelly, we have the SOC for energy and the envelopes. So if there is sufficient room on the energy side, there is, but usually when this happens, I would assume that they won't be awarded for energy as well because it's hitting the higher limit.
Okay, because that was one of our questions kind of throughout this whole process, was better understanding the interaction of what awards battery resources can continue to be awarded once they hit that upper envelope constraint because of the IR products. So yeah, if you guys could look into that, that would be great, because if we're running out of batteries by 4 p.m., I want to better understand kind of what they can continue to provide to the market, or if they're just out entirely at that point. So yeah, if you guys can provide a little bit more on that the next, and I think in the April meeting, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and Kelly, let me make a clarification here because I think the semantics matter. When we say running out of batteries, we have to be careful what that really means. I could understand that when we are operating in the real time, based on the fact that we have to make decisions, dispatches now, that may have implications for later in the day. And then if we use too much state of charge now, that means we may not have it for later on. Or if we didn't charge enough in the middle of the day, we may not have sufficient state of charge for later in the day. That is the inherent complication of the real-time market just because we are not covering the remainder of the day horizon. So referring to the case that, yes, we may run out of state of charge may be appropriate. That is not the case for the day-ahead market. When we are running the day-ahead market, we are not optimizing 1 hour in isolation without looking into the future. The inherent feature of the day-ahead market is to optimize all 24 hours. So there is no such thing that we run out of a state of charge by certain hour. Whatever the decision of the optimization to dispatch resources is taking into account all 24 hours horizon and is the optimal allocation of the state of charge throughout the day. I want to emphasize that key difference in how we are naming conditions here.
No, I appreciate that, Guillermo. That is a very good distinction. You're right. Day ahead sees the full 24 hours. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if in the day ahead, a battery resource hits that upper envelope constraint kind of in the middle of the day, is it awarded energy after that? Obviously, it's out for the imbalance reserve product. It can't be awarded imbalance reserves for the hours past that. Just trying to figure out kind of what that 24-hour horizon schedule and award looks like for storage resources in the day ahead when they hit either the upper or lower envelope constraint. But I appreciate that clarification. Completely understand and agree with what you just said. It's trying to figure out kind of the overall schedule across a 24-hour horizon for storage resources is what I'm trying to think through. Thank you. That was all I had.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Robert Fisher from NVE. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, this is Robert Fisher from NVE. Can somebody confirm they can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think a lot of the the interesting questions about the setting of the requirement and how the procurement of the IR is really based upon the demand curves. I know that's not part of the parameters, but I wanted to kind of talk about that for 1 second. I have a kind of a two-part question is, these demand curves, will there be adjustments to these based upon the further we get into production? Will they become more intelligent? Will the breakpoints be determined in a situation where they'll relax, not procuring such a high requirement based upon the time frame? So does that make sense?
Yeah, so the question is how the demand curves are going to evolve over time, Robert, in production?
Yes, correct. Because I think the demand curve is really the key feature of this. You know, these requirements, you have these requirements on slide 26 are rather large, but at the same time, if you're relaxing your demand curve at 50% of your requirement, that really kind of shows that there's an adjustment or not a need for that imbalance reserve as you go through the solution of the market. So what this data is really showing me is how well those demand curves, I think, to me, how well those demand curves are being assessed and determined is going to be just as important, if not more important, than what is being bid in, because you could almost bid based upon the demand curves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We will do our standard assessment, Robert. Once in production, we will keep monitoring how these demand curves evolve over time and how they are set, and we'll report back here.
Okay, and then from a technical perspective, how is the demand curve megawatt breakpoints determined?
They are based on at the root of it, based on the uncertainty difference between the day-ahead market and the RTPD. Historic forecast differences.
I got that, but the breakpoints is what I'm really concerned about.
Yeah, so there is a quantile regression methodology that we have, Robert, where we stack all the way from the lowest to the highest, and we go through each segment of the breakdown and form the demand curve. Yeah, we can maybe ask our forecasting team to provide more information on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think that's going to be a very intertwined component of these solutions, is how those demand curves are made, as well as the interaction with the bidding. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Robert. Next, looks like Michelle Keto raised her hand again. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so this is following up on Callie. If you go back to page 23 again, where you're showing the cleared energy and the different, first of all, it would be, on my view, it's actually not quite so clear. If you guys could put these in different colors, it would be much more helpful for us to be able to see. It would be great if you could put virtuals under CAISO cleared energy. It would also be great if you could put by type the IRU up, so by thermal and battery, consistent with these numbers, so we can see how the system is using the batteries across days. And actually, if you could do one day in particular, so we can see it, because it will be very odd if it's using all the batteries for IRU, and then in real time we're going to use all the batteries at the usual times. It seems sort of inefficient to do that. So I would just note that. In addition, I'd also say that I'm concerned about the virtuals, and let me tell you why. It looks like in parallel ops that you're picking up 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts in every hour for RCU, which means one of two things. Well, either we don't have people bidding in demand, or we're using virtuals to clear the energy market. And this is where this comes into play. So if we don't know which one of those things are, we don't really know what's going on in parallel ops. But let's just say that that virtuals are 3,000 megawatts. That's just odd to me. So it would be helpful. In addition, the prices for RCU, and this is going to come back to this discussion, but the prices for RCU are $55, which obviously I think are too high. But RCU is awarded to virtuals and energy. So if virtuals are a large portion of what clears, as they are today, so as I said, I think it was IRD down was 17% and IRU up was 30% in production. If they have to pay a high RC price, right, for capacity, then if it was $55 and they cleared at $40, that's $90, unless I'm missing something. That to me means that virtuals are going to participate less, and we don't know the effects on it. So I just bring that up as like understanding what's going on with virtuals and also understanding what's going on with RC is going to impact what happens in the day ahead market, and it's going to impact these IRU awards. And I just don't feel like we've really explored it in parallel ops. So I just bring it back to it would be helpful for us to understand the virtuals here. It would helpful be to understand how the system is using the battery assets in energy and IRU, if only for a day, but certainly for a week. If you wanted to show it here, that would be really helpful. It will be odd if it's using only battery IRU, only to know that we're going to do use the batteries at different hours. And this all has to do with the fact, from my perspective, that the IR requirement is way too large. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, which I would like you guys to consider changing for Go Live. Thanks. Bye.
Michelle, I need to have some clarification there. I want to ensure I hear that correctly. Did you indicate that virtuals get awarded in balance reserves?
Could we please unmute Michelle Keto one more time, please?
No, Guillermo, what I was saying is that virtuals are being awarded energy, and as a result, we're having to cover that energy in reliability capacity up, right? So those awards, if you look in parallel ops, are like 4,000 megawatts, which is just too large from my perspective. And people in parallel ops said that's because virtuals are clearing the market. Now, why virtuals would clear the market if they then had to pay a $55 RCU price is beyond me, but that's what's happening. And I'm not sure the virtuals understand. Maybe they are, and maybe I don't understand it, but my understanding is virtuals get allocated the RCU. If they're allocated RCU and it's expensive, I don't, and it's unknowable, I don't know how they're going to participate in the day ahead market. Maybe I'm missing something, but it just seems odd to me.
Yeah, and the implication is, well, let me clarify first to make sure that it's clear. Imbalance reserves is not awarded to virtual supply
Well,
or demand.
I understand,
Yeah,
but I'm just
sorry,
saying.
let me finish. Let me finish.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just to be clear, imbalance reserves are not awarded to virtual resources. Reliability capacity is not awarded to virtual resources. And you are right, there is an interplay of displacement, and that is the whole idea of having convergence bids in the market. Now, the concern I get with this statement, Michelle, is that you are making an assumption, and that assumption is that it implies that convergence bids are actively participating in parallel operations, looking into the results, and so on. I indicated that we are copying over production bids from virtual resources from previous days, similar days. So I want to ensure that people understand that it's no such thing that we have convergence bids actively bidding now in parallel operations, looking into what the results are.
Okay, so Guillermo, so let me confirm. You're porting over the virtual bids. It looks like virtual bids are getting 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts in the IFM, right? And then in RCU, you have to pick that up to cover the virtuals. If that happens in real time, the virtuals will have to pay the RC price, right? The RC up and the RC up. So you're right. I don't think the virtuals would participate. It's just I then went to production and saw that virtuals are very large participants right now, right? 17% of down, 30% of up. And so it seems like the virtuals are, an important part of our market. But that also means that they're going to have to pay the reliability capacity when we get to real time. And are people aware of that? And then those prices that I'm seeing are kind of high, like IRU prices are high, probably RCU prices are high. So I'm just saying that there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to happen that we're not capturing here, that's going to affect what's happening, what we're doing here. All the more reason to do scenarios with regard to IR. That's all I'm saying here, because what we have here is virtuals clearing, but we know probably virtuals won't be clearing. So maybe you do a scenario where that's different than parallel ops, where you don't have 3,000 megawatts of virtuals clearing if you don't have that, then you don't have as much IR, right?
Yeah, I don't argue the interplay that you are pointing out, Michelle. I have a concern with the assumptions and the conclusions taken to the next level of virtuals actively putting the market in certain position when there is no actual participation of virtuals in parallel operations.
Okay,
That's all.
I got it. But Guillermo, do you agree that virtuals are clearing in parallel ops in large quantities?
I don't argue the interplay, Michelle. I have already stated that.
Okay, and so if virtuals are playing a large portion I'll just say it again, if virtuals are playing a large portion of the energy cleared in parallel ops, that means that more of the energy can be used for IRU, which will not be the case. And it seems like we know that, and we should maybe look at it. But okay, I'll just leave it at that. More scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have a hand raised from Steve Keen. Go ahead, Steve.
This is Steve Keen from Edison. I'll follow up and ask something. As we move forward into phase 3 of the parallel operations, are you planning on looking at like how much of the IR is actually used? I'm thinking at, one of the things you're showing is that, storage is getting used up by the 0.85 envelope. But I think one thing that would be really interesting to understand would be when the resources that are selected for IR get to real time, how much of them are actually being used on a regular basis?
Hi, Steve. Let me clarify. Stage 3 of parallel operations is indicating that there is going to be a flow into the real time. That is mainly for the integration of the systems, making sure that the awards that are in the day-ahead market are able to flow and be seen in the real time within the context of parallel operations. It doesn't mean that they become now financially binding and they are going to be in production all the way, even for the California balancing area. So to answer your question, no, we are not going to have the information of the real time to see the full circle from day ahead to real time. That's going to be available only once we are in production with the go live.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next in the queue, we have a question from Stuart Kelly. Go ahead, Stuart.
I just have a quick question. I'm sure the demand curve is working as designed, but I've always had this concern that there may be the possibility for creating higher prices than you would ordinarily have from some other approach, like lost opportunity cost or whatever. And I'm listening to Michelle and her comments, and it sounds like with the available data is as good as it's going to get, that there's higher prices than expected. Is there any way of doing some kind of critique of that demand curve to see if it's yielding maybe, I would say, unintended consequences, anomalous prices? But I'm sure it's working as designed, but possibly higher prices than we would expect, or is it the right approach? I've always been skeptical of this approach. I don't know if there's some way to look at that and step back from this and say, do these prices seem right? They're right per the design, no doubt in my mind, but are they? Should we be using a different approach to the demand curve?
Thank you for the feedback, Stuart. Let me answer that in two parts. The first one, I understand the interest to understand how the demand curve set up may have influences on the prices, because when we use and relax the requirement through the deployment of the demand curve, it could set the price, right? So naturally, there will be interest to see how these segments of the demand curve at the corresponding prices are appropriate for the conditions that we have. So we can commit to do further analysis for what we currently see in parallel operations and bring that to the next round to provide more visibility, how we are constructing that demand curve and how those prices could be reasonable to expect. That said, the second part of my answer, I want to emphasize that this is as much as we can do. We are not in the space, it's not a forum, it's not a type of effort where we can really debate a policy that has been approved and ready to implement. We can assess how it's performing, trying to go back to the whiteboard at this stage of whether we should be using demand curve versus something else. That goes to the core of the DIM policy design that we took years to develop, and at this time is not the proper forum or time to have the discussion whether we should be opening that stage again.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Guillermo. This isn't for like redesign now, and I'm pretty confident it's going to be working the way it's supposed to be. But as we look ahead, I just want to make sure we critique this demand curve approach and make sure we landed on the right design at some point in the future, and some way step back from this and say, are these prices right? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a significant cost to carry this imbalance reserve. So that's the only reason I raise it. I just don't want to lose sight of. I don't think there's anything wrong with how it's working. I think it's working per design. I just don't know if we chose the right design, but thanks.
Thank you, Stuart.
And I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue at this time, so I think we can continue.
We'll go to the next slide. I think that's the end of my section.
Yeah, thanks. That's been some good discussion there. I'll be walking through the sensitivity analysis that we've done so far for parallel ops. So next slide, please. So to set the stage for the sensitivity analysis, what we did here is pretty similar to what we had done for the benchmark case in Market Sim, except now we are starting with the parallel operations save cases or the final results from parallel operations, and we're not changing any of those inputs except for the parameter that we're investigating in that particular sensitivity analysis. So we'll be looking at about 10 days of parallel operations data that we took and then reran with different scenarios for the envelope constraint multiplier, the DIR factor, and the set of enforced constraints. So for the envelope constraint multiplier, we're looking at 3 scenarios now: the 85%, which is our original parallel operations case, a 60% case, and a 30% case. Then for the DIR factor, we have 100%, 60%, 30%, and 0. And for our set of enforced constraints, we have one case with no IR congestion at all. Then we have a case with flow gates and nomograms enforced, but no contingencies. That is our original parallel operations case. That's what we're using right now. And then we have a parallel operations case with flow gates, nomograms, and contingencies enforced. So that's everything enforced for IR. Those scenarios were only changing the congestion for IR. We're not changing other congestion in the case. So we're just looking at changes to congestion or imbalance reserve. So we'll start with the envelope constraint multiplier piece. You can go to the next slide. And let's go one more slide. All right, so these are our 10 days that we looked at. We excluded some of the earlier days, given that we had some bit of a bumpy start to parallel ops, and we wanted to focus on the data. So we're looking at the 8th through the 17th. And we're starting here with the battery awards for the different envelope multiplier constraints. So what we see here is that in certain hours, during the solar trough, we see slightly more charging on the batteries with the lower envelope multipliers. And then on the very peak hours, we see slightly more discharging with those lower envelope multipliers. But overall, we don't see huge movement on the overall battery energy awards throughout the day when we change the envelope multipliers from 85% all the way down to 30%. So this is a little bit of a lower impact than what we saw in Market Sim. And as you'll see as we go through, that's kind of the general conclusion that we drew from most of our analysis so far. Let's see, I think we can go to the next slide. So here we're looking at the IRU awards for batteries, thermal resources, and the demand curve across all 10 days for all 3 envelope multiplier constraint cases. And we continue to see pretty strong impact of that envelope multiplier constraint on the overall battery IRU procurement, especially in those peak hours. So you'll see those spikes on that lighter blue color there for the 30% case, and a little bit on the 60% case as well. So that's what we expect coming out of Market Sim, a lower envelope constraint multiplier, and it frees up the battery state of charge to provide more IRU and more energy with their limited state of charge. We see most of the difference when the batteries have a higher envelope multiplier constraint being made up with the thermal resources. It results in a little bit more demand curve procurement in some cases, but I'd say the bulk of it goes to the thermal resources. Next slide, please. And this is the impact on the overall IRU pricing. So again, what we expected from Market Sim and just kind of the market design is that with a lower envelope constraint multiplier, we free up more supply to be used for IRU, and so we would expect lower IRU prices. That is what we saw in Market Sim, and that is what we see here, although not quite to the same extent as Market Sim. We have some slides later on that do a more direct comparison between what we see in Market Sim or what we saw in Market Sim and what we're seeing in parallel operations. But across the 10 days, this is what we saw for IRU pricing. Next slide, please. On the IRD side, see renewables really procuring the bulk of the IRD through most of the day, and then the batteries come in and provide the IRD or a good chunk of the IRD, both on that solar ramp up stage and the solar ramp down stage. And so again, what we expect, lower envelope constraint multiplier allows for more battery participation in these markets and increased battery awards. We do see a little bit of that, but it doesn't really move the whole market, especially with those renewables taking up the bulk of the IRD through the middle of the day, and fairly limited impact on the demand curve there at the bottom. Next slide, please. The impact on the IRD pricing is even more modest than what we saw for IRU. So there is a little bit, we see slightly more or slightly lower IRD prices with the lower envelope constraint multipliers. But those higher price peaks still remain even with those lower envelope constraint multipliers for IRD. So we don't see large impacts there on the overall IRD prices. Next slide, please. Here we compare directly what we saw in Market Sim to what we've been seeing in parallel ops. So on the left, we have our market sim benchmark that we presented a few months ago now. And on the right, we have the hourly profile. So just the hourly average of the battery energy awards, starting with energy here. And so there's a few things to note. One thing is that the batteries overall are providing lower amounts of total energy, so they're not charging as much through the middle of the day, and they're not discharging quite as much at the end of the day. And this is due to different bids we have between market sim and parallel ops. We also have lower loads in parallel ops, and we were seeing slightly lower pricing in parallel ops than what we had in our market sim benchmark, especially over the peak. So that really impacts how much charging batteries want to do to provide that energy over the peak. Next slide, please. This is a comparison of what we saw in market sim versus parallel ops for the IRU. So one thing that's clear here is that the kind of total overall battery saturation of the IRU market is much lower in parallel ops than what we were seeing in market sim. So that accounts for a lot of the lower pricing impacts that we were seeing on those earlier slides. We'll look more at the prices in the next slide. But overall, we just see less total battery procurement in IRU, even with those lower envelope constraint multipliers through most hours of the day. And this is due mostly to the different set of bids we have. We have more realistic bids now in parallel operations, slightly different market conditions, and yeah, the overall requirement though has remained pretty similar between what we had for our benchmark case and what we have in parallel operations. So we do just see other resource types procuring significantly more IRU across the day than we saw in market sim. Next slide, please. Here we have the impact on pricing. So you can see the overall spreads between the prices in parallel ops for the different envelope constraint multipliers are significantly lower than what we saw earlier in market sim. And again, we think that's just due to the lower amount of total batteries procuring IRU versus what we saw in market sim. Next slide, please. So in summary, got less impact in parallel operations than we saw in market sim, and we think this is due largely to less saturation of the IR market from those storage resources, more realistic bids and market scenarios in parallel ops. And then we also have some different system conditions. So our market sim benchmark day was just 1 day in October. Now we're looking across 10 days in February with better bids, and you see that lower impact from the batteries to the overall market. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So, we recognize that, we're trying to figure out the right value for this envelope constraint multiplier, or at least the best value that we can going into the next stage of parallel ops and into production. It's tricky to fully assess the effectiveness of this parameter with only the day-ahead market and no real-time feedback to kind of run a more thorough analysis on how much this IRU is being converted into energy in real time. And so, we're trying to take that into account in our analyses as well. We've also gotten a lot of participant feedback that they want to see lower envelope constraint multipliers. Given these considerations, we're proposing a lower envelope constraint multiplier of 60% for our daily market runs in parallel operations, while we continue to assess lower values for that envelope constraint multiplier with these sensitivity analyses in the second phase of parallel operations. So I'll stop now after the end of this envelope constraint multiplier piece before we move on to the DIR factor stuff and take some questions. Looks like we have a few in the queue.
Thanks, Scott. First in the queue, we have Michelle Keto. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle Keto, CPUC Energy Division. So you presented the results of the IRU prices and procurement. Did you also assess and can you present the effects on the energy market from the baseline?
Yeah, if we go back, we have the battery energy impacts. Is that what you're
No,
asking
energy
for?
prices, like the cleared prices in the energy market, right? And the ancillary service market. Remember we said that was really important in market sim?
Yes, yeah, we saw limited impact on the overall pricing, but we can.
Okay, you guys said
have that
limited
next
and we
time.
asked for the data and you wouldn't provide it. So, limited impact could be, $1 or $2 a megawatt hour, but that over 8760, that can turn out to be a lot. So it would be really helpful if you guys provided that information rather than just saying limited. It would be super helpful. I mean, just 1 hour
Yeah,
doesn't
I'll
really
take
do
that
it.
down for the
Okay.
next time.
Okay, thanks. And then also going to page 49, please. So you said less saturation of the IR market from storage resources. Again, I'm still trying to figure out if that's because people aren't participating, because remember, we're having virtuals clear and that the only 100 of the 250 scheduling coordinators are participating. So can you really say that, or can you just say, and you also say more realistic bridge, can you just say that there are more realistic bids, or could you just say that there are fewer bids? I mean, it makes a difference.
Yeah, I think we have the most realistic bid set that we can right now.
But if only
And so
50% of the
we're
batteries are
focusing with them.
participating, it's a realistic bid, but not a realistic scenario. That's what I'm getting at. Can you put in participation by resource type or something? We'd ask for like participation and you guys gave us scheduling coordinators, which isn't super helpful, right? Like 100 of 250. That could be that we only have a third participation, but that might be more than a third of the megawatts. So it's kind of important, right?
Yeah, I think we're still trying to balance what we can make public on the bidding side, and we're trying to share what we can there.
But in Market Sim, you actually did. You guys provided at the very beginning, you said, here are the bids for resources, and there were 60,000 megawatts of resources, and you showed it across the hours. And then likewise, you showed the bid stack for imbalanced reserves. And then we could say, well, everyone's participating, or at least you've seeded the bids. So this is what it's going to do. Here we have no idea.
Yeah, those were much more bids that we had seeded ourselves. But yeah, we can take that back and think about what else we might be able to share on the input bids.
Okay, I'm just concerned with the.
Recognize those do have a big impact on overall outcome.
Okay, because I'm just concerned about what you've drawn from this, and I might draw a different thing if I think only 50% of the batteries are participating.
Sure.
Okay. So if we have fewer batteries, that means we have more thermal. Have you guys been assessing whether that results in, dispatch of thermal in the middle of the day when we typically don't use it? So like if I look at production, the thermal goes down to 0. So now in parallel ops, when we have in your scenarios, well, actually in parallel ops, I can't see the thermal, but maybe you guys could tell me, are we getting more thermal dispatched in the middle of the day to support IR products at min load?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, we don't have any slides on that, but we can take that back for the next round.
That'd be super important.
Well, slide number 42 actually has the breakdown by who is providing the imbalance reserve procurement, Michelle. There is a component of battery, there's a component of thermal, and a component of the demand curve.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and the question is, how much of that thermal would be running except for the IRU? And the answer might be 0 in which case that means we're running them at min load, which means that we would have BCR. I thought part of this exercise was supposed to look at the BCR. I thought that was, maybe that was in parallel ops, but it seems like, you know, I'm trying to assess the total cost of this, and it's like, oh, so now we have less battery procurement, but now we have more thermal. Does that just mean we're going to have to pay uplift, which seems kind of like the opposite of what we were trying to do, which was, you know, have a very efficient market.
Yeah, Michelle, we have not made commitments that we're going to be looking into the VCR. For that, you need the cycle of the real time. So where are you coming that with?
Maybe that was in the parallel operations. I'll bring that up in parallel operations. Okay, that one is a good one, but it does concern me. So, okay. Okay, I think that's, oh, okay. Can you go to slide 48? Can you explain what you were saying about this again? You said how did you explain this difference?
Yeah, so the difference here we're seeing in prices between the market sim benchmark and prices in parallel operations. You know, when we change that envelope constraint multiplier, we're seeing kind of less elasticity in the price response. And I think that goes right along with the lower kind of overall battery procurement in parallel ops. So we have batteries setting the price in fewer hours or impacting the price in fewer hours. So we see a kind of lower overall response to that envelope constraint multiplier.
Okay, but if only 50% of the batteries are participating now, I don't know the answer to that. That might explain it as well, right?
We would have to look at that, I think.
Okay, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next in the queue, we have Mike Castellano. Go ahead, Mike.
Associates. I had a question about slide 43. So here, I think you did say here that there were, we generally should expect that, for example, the 60% multiplier will have lower prices than the 85% multiplier, right? And that's what we see most of the time, but it looks like on the 10th, and it's hard, maybe it's the 16th or the 17th, we see a couple times where the 60% price appears to be above the 80% price or the 85% price. I'm just curious if you were able to identify, you know, my understanding of this is basically with the 60% multiplier, you should have a larger supply, and you're apparently not changing anything other than that larger supply. So I'm just a little bit curious as to how you're getting higher prices.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we would have to look at the individual cases to know for sure. But what I would say is that, you know, one thing that we might be seeing is the price shifting to different hours. So when we change the battery participation, you know, those batteries are optimized over the whole 24 hours. So we might, for some reason, see slightly higher prices in 1 hour and lower prices later on in the next hour. It could also be quirks in the optimization. Sometimes we do have imperfect optimization in some intervals, and we are looking over quite a large number of intervals here across many cases. So, you know, without speculating too much, I would say it's definitely possible, just given the nature of how the optimization works over those 24 hours. Over those 24 hours, we would expect lower IRU pricing. Another thing I would note is that could also impact the energy pricing, and then that could impact the IRU pricing. So the overall price, energy, IRU, IRD, we would expect to be slightly lower with those lower envelope constraint multipliers. But exactly how that shows up in each hour for IRU, you know, might not be linear for each hour.
Okay, it would be good to see, you know, those overall impacts And I would also add, in relation to the potential shifting prices throughout the day, the way these graphs are presented, it's really not possible to see that on here at all. If there were less information kind of jammed in there, we might be able to see that a little more clearly. But thank you.
Sure. Yeah, point taken. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Next in the queue, we have Alva Swoboda. Go ahead, Alva.
Hello, can you hear me, Scott?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Alva from PG. Just, so I just was, one thing I'm curious about is, am I correct in general that there's been no pronounced weekend effects, that basically nothing surprising there, basically lower prices, lower procurement for all products? As far as you know, there's been no real unexpected effects now that you're including weekends in the parallel testing. That was a good point was made earlier, that you're now looking at multiple days. Just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we've seen anything that has jumped out so far. But yeah, we might have to take that one back too.
Okay, thanks. Just it looks pretty stable from the graphs you're presenting, but I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks.
Thanks, Alva. Next in the queue, we have Chunyu Luo. Go ahead, Chunyu.
I have a question. When you present the envelope constraint and the lower to 60%, there is a sentence there says you will start at phase 2. So I wonder, is this phase 2, understand the parallel apps, phase 2 already started, but is this phase 2 reference to the different phase 2? It's like next month. I think it's on slide, a couple of slides up,
Yeah, sorry about that. I would agree with you there. We'll get more into, I think, some of the specifics on that at the end. But yeah, phase 2 of Parallel Ops officially in terms of opening the transfers has already started. So this would be more of a second phase of the configurable parameters piece. But yeah, Guillermo, I think we'll talk more to that at the end of the deck. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Try to be more clear.
Thank you, Chunyu. Next, we have Steve Keen. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, can you go back to slide, I think it's 42. This is less having to do with these parameter amounts, but more having to do with something that occurs to me looking at this slide. If I'm understanding this correctly, the bottom slide is showing the amount of time that the demand curve was being used in each of these days. So basically what I'm seeing here is that over this 10-day period, in pretty much every day, the demand curve was used in at least 1 or 2 hours to solve the market. And
right.
The question that I want to ask is that what was expected? I mean, it seems a little concerning to me that the demand curve is coming into play that much during February, when we would expect the markets not to be stressed very much at all.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's tough to say exactly what we expected, but the reason behind using the demand curve instead of a single infeasibility price is that we can relax it at lower prices.
Yeah,
and
that's not my concern. Is not that I'm not objecting to the use of the demand curve. I think that I understand, and I think that makes a good bit of sense. It's just, I guess what I'm trying to get at is one of the big questions I have, and other people have raised it already, is we're dealing with a relatively low load period when there should be lots of resources online and not a lot of stress on the system. Yet the IRU procurement here is defaulting to using the demand curve, for several hours. It seems like every day. I'm just trying to think, like, extrapolating it out when we get to, July, August, and September, when things are, when the demand is significantly higher and things are a lot more stressed. Are we expecting to be using the demand curve to procure IRU, in even more hours then?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Let me
ahead,
elaborate
Jimmy.
on that, Scott. And I just need to create some expectations of reasonability here. There are many scenarios we could cover to the point that we just get paralyzed by analysis, right? We can check every single corner of the market and never end in this effort. We recognize the importance of many different features of the market. We are trying to do a very well-defined, thoughtful approach of how we assess and what elements we assess. As you may recall, Steve, in the first stage of market simulation, we indeed went into covering higher demand load days, precisely because we want to see how the things operated in that sense. Now, let me be explicit how we are approaching this for parallel operations. Can we do everything at once? No, we cannot. We have to take this by stages. We are starting parallel operations. We have to get the system stable. We're starting with the simplest approach, and that is just take at face value the information that we have from parallel operations, now that we have addressed some of the issues that we faced at the beginning, and let's see how, just under normal setup, the solution looks like. Is that all? No, it's not. We are going to, we have indicated earlier in the call that we're going to look at for other cases with higher demand loads, now that we have this basis of at least knowing where we are with the basic case. But I just want to ask for everybody to understand that we cannot just do every single possible scenario at once. We have to stage this, and yes, there will be a limitation how many scenarios we can consider. And that is one of the challenges, that we don't have a magical crystal ball to generate any infinite number of scenarios to potentially assess every corner. We have to make a conscious decisions which scenarios are more meaningful and doable to pursue, and more importantly, at what stage of the process we can proceed with those. This first stage was precisely to get stable into parallel operations, and this is what we could do. Next stage, we have committed to do higher load cases, and then we can discuss how that looks like. Please, let's make sure that we stay within the expectation of what is feasible to do at the stage where we are.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I'm not even sure that, I guess part of the question is, does it seem that these results are, I guess the term would be reasonable, given the data that's feeding into parallel ops? I mean,
well, we are open for any suggestions you may have how to make this better.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I guess that's one of the things. I think this gets back to some of the things that we've been discussing. I find this a little concerning, and I think we need to, this would be one of the things I think we need to check going forward to the extent we can. But the other question is just, you're closer to this than we are. Is there something in the, the data that's coming into parallel ops? And I think this gets maybe to, Michelle's questions about participation and other things. These results may, I don't know whether these are, whether I should rely on this or whether this is like just a result of some of the amount of participation that's happening in parallel ops, and that when we get to production, this will drop off. And you've explained this before, and I understand, there are certainly limits to what parallel ops can check. all I'm trying to make sure is that we're thinking of things so that when it goes live, we have the best expectation possible that things will work correctly.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Maybe some of this also goes back to the question Robert asked around how that demand curve price gets set for each piece. And so, if we have lower price segments on the demand curve here that are clearing, I think that is to be expected. And when we look at that price chart, you can remember that these demand curves are clearing and participating in that price setting process. So might be
Okay. Thank
worth
you.
looking more at that. But yeah, we'll continue to assess what we present on the demand curve.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, one other thought that occurs to me is like when you were going through some of the examples, it's hard. When I look at the prices that are showing up for IR, it's hard for me to understand if that price is from the demand curve or from the bids or the energy setup or whatever. Is there some way is there some information you could put out that would show, like on a daily basis, what the prices were and then maybe how that price was set? Whether it was set straight off the demand curve, whether it was in one of these things where it's the opportunity cost factoring in, or whether it's on one of the breakpoints on the demand curve.
Yeah, it's actually quite complicated to do that kind of programmatically for all intervals across the day. And that's one of the reasons we break it down by hour, is because it does take a bit of analysis to figure out what exactly is setting the price in each interval. But I think the overall final price is probably more important than whether the final megawatt was procured from the demand curve or from a resource. But yeah, the reason we go into those individual hour scenarios is to break down the complexities in terms of what can set price and what does set price in certain hours.
I appreciate it. And those were very helpful. I'm gonna have to spend a good bit of time sitting with them and going through them to make sure I understand exactly what was going on. But yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you for that.
Okay. Great. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Yeah, the introduction of the two new products adds, significantly more opportunity costs that the resources are dealing with there. So yeah, thanks for that feedback.
I appreciate that example where it was it wasn't the opportunity cost for energy, it was the opportunity cost for, was it spinning reserve that was causing the price?
Right. Yep.
Because I hadn't even thought about that. So thank you for those examples.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback.
Thanks, Steve. I'm seeing we have one final hand from Michelle Keto, and this will be the last question we'll be taking in the interest of time. Thank you.
Hey, Scott, can you, sorry, just refresh me if the demand curve doesn't procure it or does procure it, so we have those demand curves that Steve Keen was talking about, does that get picked up in RCU or not?
We freeze the resource IR words when we go into RUC, but the demand curve procurement itself, I wouldn't say really flows into the RUC results directly.
Okay, so if we have a day with no IR procurement, we wouldn't procure more RCU.
It wouldn't impact the total amount of RCU that we procure, no.
Okay, so RCU is only going to be the difference between bid and demand and CAISO's forecast and covering the virtuals. There will be no load bias. Is that right?
I didn't quite follow everything you just said.
Okay, so RCU covers the difference between bid and demand. And CAISO's load
Cleared bid
forecast,
and demand.
right?
Yep.
And covers virtuals. So CAISO is committed to not doing any load biasing to cover the uncertainty.
Hi, Michelle. This is Guillermo. Let me take on that, Scott.
Sure.
So let me first start with what the market is actually set up to do. Imbalance reserves, either up or down, are fully procured only through the integrated forward market process, the IFM. That is where the demand curve plays a role because it determines the trade-off between clearing more or more expensive supply not really available for imbalance reserves. Once we go into the reliability run, that is the ROC process, we clear now against the forecast demand. And any difference between the forecast and the bidding demand clear in IFM and any displacement created by virtual is going to be naturally procured by the reliability capacity products, either up or down. In the ROC process, we do not procure neither absolute or incremental additional imbalance reserves. Okay, that is one logic that is in there. Now, you are actually after something different. Your question is under the EDAM construct, are we going to have under the EDAM construct any ROC adjustment in the ROC process? Is that your question?
Yeah, or is the RUC adjustment process going to take into account the IRU that's procured? I mean, I would think obviously, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, you are right. We are exploring the mechanisms because, well, let me unpack this because there is an extra layer of complexity here. The ROC adjustment has served two purposes and will continue to serve potentially at least one more purpose, and that is operational concerns and issues that operators may face. So, unrelated to the uncertainty component that is now associated with imbalance reserves, there will continue to be concerns about other non-uncertainty operational risk, such as the typical ones when we have fires on the transmission line. So for those cases, I expect that there will be cases where there will be a need for having additional reliability capacity procured in the ROC process through an operator adjustment. And I need to put that aside. Now, more specific to the ROC adjustments in lieu of the uncertainty. You are right, we're exploring if there are cases, critical cases where operators have a concern that there will be quite a volatility in the given day. Will they need to have additional imbalance reserve or additional capacity procured in the ROC process to cover for that, given where the imbalance reserves were procured? Yes, potentially there could be a case where they need to procure additional capacity in the ROC process to cover the risk that may not be covered yet naturally through the integrated forward market. Would that be all from zero? No. Ideally, it would be only on top of what was already procured in the integrated forward market.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time, so I think we can continue on.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that discussion. So our next piece, we'll look at the deployed imbalance reserve factor and the sensitivity scenarios we ran for this parameter. Just as a quick refresher, this DIR factor sets how much of the imbalance reserve we evaluate in those imbalance reserve congestion scenarios. So when we have a 0% DIR factor, we essentially have zero impact to congestion from imbalance reserves. And when we have 100, all of the IRU is essentially assessed for congestion impacts. So here again, we look at the total IRU And now we're looking across batteries, thermals, renewables, and the demand curve for IRU across these 4 different DIR factor cases. And what we notice is that there's pretty small overall impacts, really only certain hours where maybe we had more congestion on the system, where we see any impact at all. So pretty limited impact to the overall procurement for IRU, even changing from 0 to 100% of that DIR factor. Next slide, please. Here is the impact on pricing. So again, you can see in certain hours, we have some impact from that DIR factor. As was mentioned earlier, it's not always in the direction that we would expect. So with a 0% DIR factor, in that one interval there at 215, you do see a higher price with that lower DIR factor. So again, that could be due to some interesting congestion impact in that one interval. It could also be due to imperfect optimization in that one interval. So I would, limit the amount that we draw from single spikes like that. Overall, saw very limited impacts to the IRU price, even across this full range of DIR factor values. Next slide, please. When we look at IRD, we see the same story, except maybe even slightly lower impact than what we saw for IRU. So very little impact to overall trend of what was procured for IRD. And that's across, all resource types. Next slide, please. And again, for the IRD pricing, it's a very similar story where we really don't see much impact to the overall IRD price from changing that DIR factor. Next slide, please. So one thing we presented last time we looked at these DIR factors in Market Sim were these box plots of the IRU congestion component for resources that were awarded IRU. So just to break that down a little more, what we're looking at here is resources that were awarded IRU and have a non-zero IRU congestion component of LMP. And then we're looking at that for each of these DIR factor cases across the 10 days. And so what we expect is that as we increase that DIR factor, we see a greater spread on the resource congestion component of LMP when we have more impact of congestion on the IRU price. And so that is what we see here. You can see at that top case, when there's a 0 DIR factor, there's no impact to congestion to the IRU product, and there's no IRU congestion component of LMP. And then as we increase that DIR factor, we see the spread increase a little bit, from day to day, but even looking at these congestion component charts, don't necessarily see, huge amounts of resource congestion component impact to the LMP, even with the 100% DIR factor. So overall, in these cases, we're just seeing pretty limited impacts to the IRU and IRD product from congestion. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is that same plot, but for IRD. And so what you'll notice is that the IRD price spreads are, even lower than what we saw for IRU. Next slide, please. So in summary, these DIR factors have continued to have pretty modest impact on the overall prices, which is pretty similar to what we observed in Market Sim, where we really had to dig down to the resource level in order to see some changes. yeah, we recognize that these DIR factors do directly influence the deliverability of the IR that we do procure. You know, and with a higher DIR factor, we are, you know, kind of guaranteeing, or it's more likely that the DIR or the IR that we do procure in those constrained areas will be available. So we do recognize the value of that. Next slide, please. So given the pretty modest impact that we've seen, our proposal is to also reduce down the DIR factor that we're using in our daily market runs and parallel operations to 60% and continue to assess with these same sensitivity scenarios for other values lower than 60%. So that's the end of our DIR factor section. Don't see any questions, so I'll just continue on to the set of enforced constraint scenarios. Next slide, please. So these are the scenarios where we are assessing which constraints we enforce for the IR scenarios. So again, we have the no IR congestion scenario. We have the flow gates and nomograms, which are what we are currently using in the parallel ops runs. And then we have the flow gates, nomograms, and contingencies. Flow gates and nomograms are what we currently have enforced for FRP as well, which is important to note when we're thinking about syncing up between day ahead and real time. What we see when we look at these different congestion scenarios is we do see some impact from the no IR congestion scenario and the enforcement of contingencies on the overall CAISO IRU price. We see essentially no impact to the PAC IRU pricing, but the pricing that we do see to the CAISO IRU is modest and really depends on the day and the congestion. Next slide, please. When we look at the impact to IRD, I'd say we see less impacts for CAISO and essentially zero impacts for PAC. Let's go to the next slide, please. So as we've been stating kind of all along here, decision on which constraints we end up enforcing will be based not only on the market impacts, but also on the market run times and coordination with the FlexRamp product in real time. So we do want the constraints that we enforce for IR in day ahead to sync up with what we enforce for the FRP product in real time. And currently in real time, we are not enforcing those contingencies due to the market run times in real time. So there will continue to be a balance there between you know, what we can enforce in day ahead and what we can enforce in real time, and the need to sync those two up. Yeah, we would expect that enforcing more IR constraints in the market will tend to result in higher IR pricing, but at least what we've seen so far is that that impact is fairly moderate, at least on the days we've been looking at and with the congestion we've currently been seeing. So our proposal for the second phase of the configurable parameters piece is to continue to enforce only the flow gates and nomograms and continue to leave out the contingencies. And that aligns with what we currently have in production for FRP. All right, I think that's the end of my slides. Can you go forward one? So I'll stop here for any questions, and then I'll pass it over to Guillermo to talk more about our plan for go live.
I'm not seeing any questions coming in the queue, so I think we can continue on to Guillermo.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Christina. Can we move to the next slide, please? Well, you have seen and we have discussed the analysis that we have performed for the first period of the parallel operations effort. We will continue to assess the performance using the reference of the parallel operations for the remainder of the 2 working group sessions prior to go live. Now, time-wise, this is, or activities-wise, this is how we are planning the remainder of the effort. We still have 2 more working group sessions. One is towards the end of March, and we are going to expand that to 1 more for April. I'm expecting that we can have that early in April rather than later, because obviously we want to set all this as early as possible before going to production. We have discussed this also with the Market Surveillance Committee in the session that took place on February 6th. And we start socializing in that first opportunity the plan that now I want to have a more explicit discussion. We are also scheduled to have a briefing to the Board of Governors and the WAEM governing body next week in the March session. And based on the information that Scott has gone through, he already signaled the recommendation that we are putting on the table for your consideration. And that is, we want to proceed with some adjustments to specifically 3 of the 5 parameters that we have in the scope of the working group session. And that was the main takeaway from today's session. Now I'm going to return to this topic in a couple of slides. The idea is that we can proceed with making those changes to those parameters in parallel operations, and we can actually proceed with that as early as next week. We would really like to get your feedback. Typically, we have the period of comments to be about 2 weeks. That will continue to be in place. But if we are expecting to effectuate any changes to parallel operations, it really needs to go somewhere next week. If we pass next week, we jeopardize the ability for us to run the cases, do the analysis, and have that information on time for the March working group session. So my ask to participants today is to ensure that if you have any reactions to the proposal of adjusting the values for parallel operations, with the mindset that this would be at least the values that we go live with in production, please give us any feedback as soon as possible, because we are going to plan to make those adjustments next week. And getting your feedback before we make the changes would be more effective, rather than just proceed with the changes and then hear your feedback. So you can give us any feedback as early as I would say next Wednesday. That will give us the time to effectuate the changes in parallel operations before the end of the week, and then we can start really collecting cases with these new adjusted values in parallel operations. And with that, we are expecting to have some meaningful sample of parallel operation cases that we can rely to see how these adjusted values are performing or impacting the performance of the parallel operations market. And that would be effectively the scope of the discussion that we would have in March, just to see how parallel operations is performing under the new values. We would still have one last chance after the working group of March to potentially do an additional tuning to those parameters that could take effect somewhere in the first week of April, before we come back to the last working group prior to go live in April to settle on what values we're going to go live for EDAM. And that would be effectively the recommendation we have for the April working group. It's going to be at that time when we are going to revise the BPM language to reflect those values that we're going to go live with. And obviously, this doesn't end there. This is just the pre-go live stage. We have committed to continue this assessment. I think it's it is a lot of value to continue to have these working groups post-go live. We are expecting to have somehow the same monthly cadence to have reporting on how the market is performing, not just about the parameters, but overall, and obviously the effects of these parameters in the market solution. And that is what we are calling effectively the phase 2. And the time is still to be determined. This is something that we want to discuss today. So let's move on. I see a hand. Let me just go through the few slides that we have for this topic, and then we can have open forum for questions and comments. Next slide, please. What is effectively the plan that we are proposing moving forward? We already socialized to some extent in the first opportunity we have last time with the Market Surveillance Committee. We want to go more into the specifics of that plan with you in this working group session. And the reality is that, as you may have learning from all the working groups discussions we have had for the last few months, there are a lot of uncertainties related to eventually how things are going to play out once we go live. We are trying to do as much as anticipation of challenges and functionality issues that we may find to try to be as good as possible for the go live. But still, there are some uncertainties that cannot be eliminated. Much of that has to do with the type of participation we're going to get, how reflective the data that we have right now in parallel operations and before in market simulation could be a crystal ball for what is going to be in actual production. So we know that there are uncertainties that are going to be clearing out only until we go actual production. And because of that, we are proposing to be more deliberate how we go with the go live of EDAM. We want to be more explicit, indicating that we suggest to have a two-phase approach. The first phase is effectively going live, right? How light, how conservative, or how liberal we want to go on day one. And this is the proposal where we want to be as conservative as possible, as light as possible in the setup, to ensure that if there are any unintended consequences, any unexpected outcomes, the implications are more manageable given the fact that we are going light in the implementation. And then, naturally, that is already bounded to happen, either with this more explicit approach or in the original one, that at some point down the road, once we have actual operational data, we can have a second phase to now go into the more foundational setup of the parameters. Once we know exactly how the market is performing, we can be not aggressive, not conservative, not liberal, but just do the right call for the values that make sense based on the performance of the market. We are going to be closely looking into the performance of data, not just related specifically to the parameters, but in general, the whole functionality of data. This is a complex, extensive implementation we are going to go through that has many implications in many features and functionalities of the market. And once we have this actual data, we're going to have this unique opportunity to be able to assess realistically all the implications that these parameters may have on the effectiveness of the market. This is not a brand new idea. In the past, we have used this approach of trying to go light on training wheels to begin with, and then once we settle, get the system stable, we default back to the normal standard setup. It's something similar, for instance, to what we did in the MRTU when we have the bit caps coming lower than what it was intended to be, just for the transitional period. I would explicitly call this to be a transitional period approach. It's not that we are abandoning the principles for which we have designed the DAM and all the features that we have in place. It is simply to manage the additional risk that involves launching something brand new, this complex, so that we can have a more controllable environment to deal with any outcomes that we could see that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. Now, let me separate the discussion in two parts. The first one is, strictly speaking, within the scope of this working group. This scope is very well defined. It's composed of 5 different parameters, and I have listed those here. The idea is that for each of these parameters, we are making a proposal. Now, going back to Chunju's question earlier today about phase 1, phase 2, parallel operations, configurable parameters, let me try to clear that confusion that we have created by referring to phases. There are 3 phases for the effort of parallel operations, independent of what we are doing for the configurable parameters. And that is phase 1, no transfers, phase 2, opening the transfers, phase 3, flowing information into the real time. These are what they are for the purpose of parallel operations. Now, in the context of the configurable parameter effort, we are also calling 2 parts, 2 phases, 2 stages. In the first part is what we have already done. We just go with the cases that were produced in parallel operations. We start with the values that we suggested at the end of market simulation, 100% deployable factors, 85% attenuation factors, all constraints or only flow gate constraints and nomograms, and then expand for contingencies. Then use the $55 for the bit cap and the default bit. Now that we have done the assessment and we want to proceed with the second part of parallel operations for the configurable parameters, we want to adjust some of those values, and that is what we are calling the second part of parallel operations for the configurable parameters. And that is a proposal that Scott already went through. For the set of enforced constraints, for the second part of parallel operations, the one that we would be reporting back in March, working group, is to enforce only flow gates and nomograms. Don't enforce contingencies. The $55 for the bit cap and the default bit will continue to be 55. They are prescribed in the tariff, and therefore we are not making any assessment of different values. And then for the deployment factor and for the envelope multiplier, we want to move from the current 100% and 85% respectively to 60%. That is a more, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I should say conservative or liberal, but it's lighter implementation, less stringent values into the setup, and put those as early as next week and start assessing how those parameters play out in the market solution. And that would be the result that we would be reporting back in March. Now, based on the result that we find in March, as I indicated, there could be a possibility that we can still do further tuning between the end of March and maybe the first 2 weeks of April for any recalibration that we find necessary or valuable based on the information that we're going to be collecting from the March working group. And those would be effectively the values that are going to be ready to go for IDAM go live. Now, once we go into production, we are talking about this revised plan of 2 phases. The first phase is go live day 1, May 2026, relying on the values that we have set up in the last working session of April. And they will be there in the market for some time being that we have to define, so that eventually, once we have collected all the operational data, we do the assessment for all the parameters and beyond the parameters, we can come with a second phase. Most likely, it could be somewhere in September, but it's wide open to discussion. And from there, we can really bring the parameters to where they should be based on the analytics, based on the technical assessment. The first phase, again, is a transitional approach. It's not that we are undermining the principles that we use to define the policy design. It's simply a transitional, light ramping phase that we want to have to ensure that we have a more controllable outcome of the market. And this is the approach that we want to take. Now, there is one more element that I already signaled in the last discussion with the Market Surveillance Committee. So if we can move to the last slide, please. Are there other factors to consider? I want to clearly separate that discussion from the scope of the working group, the configurable parameters, that is the 5 parameters that we have discussed at length for the last few months. Let me start first with one of the most obvious questions. If we're going to have this two-phase approach, what is the duration of the first phase? It's going to go from day one of EDAM go live up to when? Well, realistically, to have some solid sample of the data, I'm expecting that we need to have at least 3 months worth of data. That would be data that accrues somehow from the shoulder months going into the summer conditions. That would be May, June, and July, so that we can collect some minimum trends and be able to see that there is indeed trends rather than just a point to make a decision. Now, the duration of the period also has to consider the implication that if we just go with 3 months, and again, this is flexible, it's just a proposal to react. If we go with 3 month period, that would put us basically in the middle of summer conditions. And as you all know, summer is not granted how it's going to turn out to be. It could be relatively quiet to what we experienced last year. It could be more active to what we have experienced in the previous years. And we have to be mindful whether we want to be making changes to such impactful market solutions of the EDAM in the middle of summer. So there could be an inclination to try to do this just past the critical period of summer, and that's the reason I was referring to September. All these are factors for your consideration where we are looking for feedback from you. Now, in addition to the 5 parameters that are in the scope of the working group of the configurable parameters, as I indicated in the Market Surveillance Committee discussion, there could be also another factor that we have to consider. Should we consider a reduction of the imbalance reserve requirements for the purpose of the transitional period with the mindset and objective to have a lighter ramping phase approach, including lower requirements for imbalance reserves? That is on the table. I would love to hear all feedback that you may have, either now through the formal comments that you can have for this round, because that is a factor that we have to consider. If this is a transitional period, the question would be, are the 5 parameters enough to give us the confidence that we have this lighter transitional approach, or we have to go even further than that and potentially touch the imbalance reserve requirements? And let me be clear on that. This is for the purpose of the transitional period. It's not that we are abandoning or undermining the principles of the construct that we have for imbalance reserve. Similar to the other parameters, this is only for the sake of having a more controllable, lighter implementation for the go live to deal with the uncertainties that are bounded to exist. And we are seeking active feedback from all participants about these items. The two-phase approach, the values proposed for parallel operations in the second part, the consideration of extending that transitional approach to the imbalance reserve requirements, and the period for which the transitional period could apply. So there are a few items that we would be very happy to hear feedback so that we can make those considerations, and based on that, we can actually assess further implications during parallel operations. So with that, let me open up the door for any questions, any comments, reactions that people may have on this plan. Isabella, Cristina?
Yes. First in the queue, we have Michelle Keto. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle Keto from the CPUC. I wholeheartedly support assessing potentially lower requirements. In our last comments, we noted that CAISO used in the RUC process the 97.5% uncertainty in only 3% of the hours. It used the 75% adjustment in 25% of the hours, 50% adjustment in 25% of the hours, and 0% adjustment in 50% of the hours. In addition, I'd note that the whole thing that was brought up on the MSC was that the prices that we were seeing in the imbalance reserve product were not really consistent with, were not expected and weren't really consistent with an efficient, seemingly consistent with an efficient market. And based on your analysis, it kind of seems like changing the parameters that you proposed here kind of doesn't make any difference. Now, I would argue maybe it's because of the things that the points that I raised, and maybe it will make a difference. And I do support going into parallel operations with the lower values for those reasons. But the fundamental issue is that these were higher than we were expecting. And it seems like lowering those parameters isn't going to work. And I have some other comments. I guess that's just a comment.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, so my other comments on your phase 2 that you showed on the previous page for things to consider in September. Can you go back to that page? Sorry. It's hard. No, one more back. The revised plan. So I would say the second phase should begin. I mean, the go live first phase should, if you're going to make changes, I would suggest that you make them through September, because as you recall, at least the beginning of September can be a tough month in California. So that's my other comment. In addition, in that second phase for September 2026 going forward, I think we also have to consider the resources that can meet the requirement. So recall that it's a 15-minute dispatchable and 30 minutes of movement. And I believe Scott Harvey had suggested, maybe 30-minute requirement or maybe the hour movement. So I think that should be considered, as well as the requirements themselves. So I would put that in the second phase for things to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And let me just point to that, because yes, we have heard from the Market Surveillance Committee, from the Department of Market Monitoring, to explicitly check on that component. Yes, it's in our to-do list.
Okay, I would, just put it down there. I think, and then my other question, here's a question. When you said MSC meeting on February 6th, I know you had a MSC meeting, but are you proposing to bring this back again to discuss next week as well?
No, I don't think we are scoping to have a discussion on this topic next week.
Okay, but do we expect to bring it back to the Market Surveillance Committee at all?
I will have to check with others about the schedule, Michelle, just to see how feasible that is.
Okay. I'd argue that might be a useful exercise. Okay, so that's my final suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for the feedback. I would really appreciate that any comment that you put in today, not just for Michelle, but for anybody, that you please take the time to also put those on written so that we don't miss anything of that.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Stuart Kelly. Go ahead, Stuart.
Guillermo, just to say that, LA fully supports this measured introduction plan and appreciate you putting that together, as well as a lower requirement. One thing I would ask is, as we're in production, is it possible to compare what the result would have been had we introduced the full design versus what it is under a measured approach? I don't know if that's possible, but if you could at least think of that. But I do appreciate you putting this together, and I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Stuart.
Next in the queue, we have Alan Meck. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, Alan Meck, PG&E. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Just wanted to support the points already made by Michelle Keto and Stuart Kelly. I would support lowering the requirements of imbalance reserves, as well as also considering extending through September. That seems sensible given the difficulties that we've all obviously experienced, we're all aware of in the month of September in the past. I think that would be sensible.
Great. Thank you, Alan, for the feedback.
Thank you, Alan. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue at this time.
Okay, well, I think that's all what we have for today. I still want to emphasize, please, the earlier request today. We are expecting to effectuate the changes for the configurable parameters in parallel operations as early as next week. So you have any reactions to the values that we propose of 60% and also the limited set of constraints enforced? Please provide that as soon as possible, because I think towards the end of next week, we would be ready to make those changes. And we want to ensure that we don't miss anything. And if you have any comments, that would be the right time to consider those before we actually make the changes. And then you typically have the standard window for comments, so we can incorporate those in the information and analysis that we're going to do for the March session. Thank you. I think we have one more comment in the queue.
Yeah, we did just a question from Steve Keen.
Dean from Edison, I just want to be clear on something. The concept you're talking about of maybe reducing the requirements, are you planning on testing that in parallel operations?
If we make the decision to move forward, yes. Ideally, we want to put everything in parallel operations as it would go in production so that we can have an opportunity to see how things work.
Okay. And when, do you have any idea when you'll make that decision and when we'll know whether this will be part of parallel operations?
Yeah, most likely we are going to go through the setup. I have to think here loudly because of the timing, right? So we are going to receive comments by, let me see, by March 12th. And the next working group session is going to be basically 2 weeks later. So it would be extremely tight to try to make any analysis once the comments are received, because that will give us basically a few days. So the minimum we can do is to proceed with the parameters that we discussed today, effectuate the changes, be able to report that on March, and based on the feedback that we receive and the internal assessment that we do, we can communicate in the March working group the decision of the requirements. If we find that the time may be too tight, we may do just a ad hoc call, short call to discuss this topic before the March session. I doubt we would have the time, but the worst case scenario, Steve, I'm thinking is that we could put this for the last week, actually for the first week of April, once we made the final decision for the configurable parameters in March, and then we can explore if we are going to proceed forward with the requirements. So realistically, most likely, we could make any final changes that could be reflective in the first week of April.
Okay, great, thank you. And I realize that the problems with this, I was just trying to see if we could get an idea. Also, if there's anything we can help you with making a decision.
Well, I think for now, all your comments are more than welcome in written fashion, so we can really internalize that, and the sooner the better, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. And looks like we have another hand from Michelle. Michelle, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, Michelle Hito. Hey, Guillermo, could you, since you guys have already really done the scenarios with the changed configurable parameters, can't you be working on scenarios with the 75%, for example, requirement in the interim so that you can see what the effects are? I mean, it doesn't seem like you need to wait for comments and then, and then and then, you know, a decision before actually just sort of looking at what the effects are, right?
Yes, and we are doing that, Michelle.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Just making sure.
Yeah,
Thanks. Bye.
thank you.
And I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that brings us to our next steps. So as Guillermo mentioned, we will be taking comments until March 12th. A comment template will be available out on the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative webpage. But if you have any questions or additional feedback you'd like to provide before March 12th, please send us an email at isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation today. Really good discussion. And with that, I'll turn things over to Christina to close us out.
Thanks, Isabella. Now I just have a couple quick announcements before we close out. Here you can see some stakeholder meetings, comment deadlines, and trainings occurring at the ISO this week. Here are some details on market simulation meetings and business practice manual updates. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, please be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see some of our latest blog posts. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's meeting and for all your participation. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. All meeting materials are available on the initiative webpage, and the video recording will be posted there soon as well. We thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.